Hello again. I was asked to suggest the three most important books that I've read that have helped me understand life and my subject matter and storytelling and so on and so forth, and three of the most influential films I've ever seen. Now, it's very difficult to reduce to a list of three the most important books that I've read, because fortunately I've read many books which have influenced me immensely. But I will suggest the three books which I believe are the ones that have possibly influenced me the most in my thought. And two of them are, they're all three, they're history books, because history has taught me the most. Obviously, I teach motivational storytelling, strategic storytelling, but it's history that gives me the basis of what to tell stories about. So the first book that really struck me and that really helped me understand the complexity of national identity, the complexity of relationships, of life, was a book that I read years ago called The Passion of the Western Mind by Richard Tarnas. And you'll see that here. Richard Tarnas wrote this very complete history of the Western mind, which really explains the complexities of history and the turning points of thought. And this struck me immensely. It gave me a vision which was just much more ample than I had had before. The second book, history book, I read a couple of years ago, called Sapiens by Yuval Harari. And again, a history book which reorganizes and puts into perspective human development and historical development. They're both histories of mankind. They're both histories which trace, the first one, what man has done in the Western world, and the second one, man in general on the planet. And they were books that have excited me profoundly and have changed me profoundly. The third book is a book on the history of clothing. It's called Worn by Sari. I have to read this because I don't remember her name. It's written by Sophie Tannhauser. Sophie Tannhauser. Worn is the history of clothing. And it shows how the history of clothing has shaped politics, economy, sociology, and consequentially, psychology. If you wanted to know the two most important books to help you understand storytelling, I would simply say the most important book to understand storytelling, the way I understand storytelling, is called Into the Woods by John York. Into the Woods. If you're interested in why stories work, how they work, and why they have been so influential in our culture, in the world culture of every nation, of every group of people, then that is the book to read. Now, it has been asked of me also to name the three films that have been most influential in my life. And I teach cinema. I teach cinema and sociology as one course at the Università Bocconi. And it has really helped me understand, obviously, I've been teaching for years and years and years. It has helped me understand the role of storytelling, and it has provoked me to understand the films that are, I believe, some of the finest films I've ever seen. And again, it's difficult to stop at three. But let me just take a look and say that the three films which have become really 5 films, which have struck me emotionally and psychologically and historically. This is not in the order of importance. This is the order of how I feel that there are simply that come to mind. All these films, I think, are beautifully made and are worthy of thought. Some of them are easy to watch. Some of them are not easy to watch. So it's not a question of choosing a film which I had fun watching, or I loved watching, or I cried at the end. There are many films that I've loved watching, many films which are beautifully made. But these films struck me on a deeper level, and that's why I suggest them to you. The first film that comes to mind is by a director called John Cassavetes, who was an American director, and the film is A Woman Under the Influence. It is a difficult film about the neuroses of a particular woman. The way that Cassavetes explores the fractures, the difficulties of the mind of this woman are magnificent. The way he visualizes cinematographically her turmoil, her conflicts, and her attempts at understanding herself, I think are really quite extraordinary. It's not an easy film. It's not a film you say, oh, wow, that was a great film. It's a deep film. After A Woman Under the Influence, there was another film that struck me immensely, an easier film to watch, not because it's easy to look at, because it's about war, and so it's sometimes very difficult to look at, but a beautifully made film is called, for me, The Wind in the Barley by Ken Loach. Ken Loach is a British documentary photographer who became a renowned film director. Not a photographer, he was a BBC documentary cinematographer, and then he launched his career after working for the BBC for 20 years as a film director. And his films are always about human strife, human conflict, especially between the system, the political system, the economic system, the advantages and disadvantages of being a poor person or not having the right education, the underemployed, and so on and so forth. And this film instead is about the conflict between England and Ireland in the early 1900s. It is a wrenching film, magnificently structured, beautifully acted, wonderful film, a very difficult film to watch, The Wind in the Barley. And it shows to what lengths human nature is in conflict with history. A third film which I suggest, which is again a film almost impossible to watch, but I found it an extraordinary experience. I watched it at intervals. It's a film that lasts for 6 hours, so I did not watch it from the beginning to end, is by a Hungarian director called Béla Tár, and the film is called Santan Tango. It's the story of, at the end of the destruction of the Soviet Union, the story of a village that found itself abandoned by a political structure which no longer exists. And it explores the petty relationships of the people in the village, of their desires, of their ignorance, of their needs, in a very real-time way. If they dance for 15 minutes in a bar, you see them dance for 15 minutes in a bar. There is no condensation of time, or there's very little. It's an amazing film, magnificently photographed, and has many stories within it that are really stringent, very, very profoundly emotional stories. A next film, which I obviously have adored for years, on the same level of depth, is Federico Fellini's 8½. 8½, is a film that today people have difficulty watching because it's slow, because the whole film is about the protagonist's doubts. And the protagonist is always doubting himself. So it's a profoundly, in a certain sense, boring film, beautifully photographed, but a beautiful evolution of the protagonist through encountering all of his doubts throughout his career and throughout his life. So 8.5 definitely is a wonderful film. I believe the last film I will suggest, which I find amazingly thrilling to watch and a beautifully constructed film, is called Thelma and Louise by Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott made this film the story of two women trying to break free from traditional masculine relationships. But it's a deeper story. It's a story about the structure of human life and how people conform or not conform or find their own place in life. Beautiful film. It's a film that just keeps you from the beginning to the end, always really grabbed by the film. If you want to watch a film that is simply super pleasurable to watch, Thelma and Louise is the film to watch. It is definitely one of the most exciting films and one of the most beautifully made films. The dialogue is so precise. The dramatic arc is so beautifully constructed scene by scene. Excellent film. So these are my recommendations. I know I've recommended more than I should. I know that I've maybe spoken longer about each one than I should, but you might find some of these books and some of these movies as interesting and as mind-changing as I have. I will add one more book, which I did not include in my first list, trying to not mention too many books. But a book that changed me quite a bit was Liquid Modernity by Zygmunt Bauman. Liquid Modernity is a book written by Zygmunt Bauman, who was a sociologist and had an enormous insight into how postmodern society was changing and how it has changed us all. So I add on, because it was a highly influential book in my life, Liquid Modernity by Zygmunt Bauman. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed my little reviews, and I hope at some point in your life, one of these films or one of these books might be interesting to you as well. Thank you.